It's Mo. It is March 31st. It is a Sunday, and on Thursday, March 28th, it was opening day of baseball season. Last year, I had intended to do a vlog for opening day that came out on opening day, and I had intended to read a bunch of baseball mysteries because March is the opening month of baseball season, but it is also March Mystery Madness, which is one of my favorite booktube readathon months. I didn't get a chance to put it out that day. I put it out a few days later. This year I wanted to do another vlog for opening day, but my reading has been I've been reading a lot, and I've been reading a lot of great things, and I'm happy with what I'm reading, but I feel like the books that I'm intending to read, I'm not getting to. I'm reading other books instead, which is fine. I'm a mood reader, but I'm definitely feeling like my mood reading is taking priority over any kind of events or readathons or video ideas that I have. So I didn't get a chance to start the book that I want to read for this opening day vlog until opening day. But I figured that's still cool. I'm still, doing an opening day vlog. And this year I'm going to read The Incredible World Champ Mets by Maury Allen. This book is from 1969, the year after the Mets won their first World Series in 1968. And it talks all about that particular season and that particular year and them being in the playoffs and them being in the World Series. But it goes all the way back to the beginning of Mets history. The Mets, who are a New York team with a stadium in Queens, New York, were part of the 1961 expansion. So in 1961, baseball decided they were going to expand and there were going to be extra teams on the National League in both the West and East National League divisions. The Mets actually started their season in 1962. They were foretold of in 1961, but the team was gathered and they had their first spring training and they played their first games in 1962 under the management of Casey Stengel. So I have started this book, as you can tell, because I know a lot more information than I would know as like a normal person, as like a layman, or even I think as a fan who is not like a fanatic fan, a super fan. I have read up to page 65, which is chapter 5 in this book so far, and so far the information in these first 5 chapters was really interesting and talks all about the expansion leagues, talks all about the players who were in the first couple of seasons. Chapter 5 brings us right up to 1965, which is a pivotal year for the Mets because their manager suffered a broken hip and he was not able to manage anymore. So going into the 1965 season, they are having to have new management and figure things out. One of the classic things, if you are not a baseball fan, if you are not a Mets fan, is the Mets are terrible. They're a very bad team, and they always were a very bad team. They lost 9 games in a row their first season, right off the bat, right out of the spring training season, and the next year they've lost 8 in a row. So, they're not a good team. They've only been to the playoffs a handful of times, and they've only been to the World Series a handful of times. But I think that's what makes them so endearing and so popular, especially to a New Yorker, especially to someone who lived for a long time in New York, because the other team that you have to possibly root for are the Yankees, and the Yankees are this uber team, this super team, super rich, super entitled, super snobby, really obnoxious, and although they're great, although they win all the time, although they have great players and lots of money to buy great players, they suck. And if you're a New Yorker, you have to pick a side. You're either with the rich elite, win all the time snobs, or you're with the underdogs, the working class, the sweethearts that are the Mets, goofballs, zany losers that you can actually identify with as opposed to someone like the Yankees. And don't even get me started, you certainly can't be a Phillies fan because the Phillies, especially their fans, are really nasty and we don't like the Phillies. Even though technically I am from New Jersey and I'm right in between the New Jersey areas where I could be a Yankees fan or I could be a Phillies fan. If I had been raised a little further south, I probably would have ended up a Phillies fan. But thank goodness for me, I lived in Brooklyn for 15 years and I became a Mets fan. This book is a nonfiction written, like I said, in 1969, the year after they won the first World Series. The author of this book Maury has a lot of other sports books and has done a lot of other sports writing. And you can tell the book is written very much at a time when sports writing was written a certain way, and this is told in a very like tongue-in-cheek, very sound-biteable, very jokey kind of way. The only other baseball book that I've read that's very, very similar to this is Ball 4, which is another nonfiction, and it's actually a personal diary of a player. Even though that one was written later than this one, I think that that is just the style which like appealed to baseball people at this time. I think nowadays in 2024, it's not as like silly and jokey, and it's a lot more serious and about money, and it's a lot more written for like serious readers and statistics and journalism, as opposed to like this very punchy, tongue-in-cheek kind of writing. You know, you think of some of the Yogi Berra quotes, you think of some of the Babe Ruth quotes, you think of that very New York-y style, almost caricature of a 1930s, anywhere from 1930s to 1950s to 1970s ball player, and that's how this is written. So it does get a little tiring, I think, as a modern reader. I felt that way about Ball 4. I have not finished Ball 4. I've only gotten like 25% into that book. That's definitely one that I could read one year for a opening day vlog, but that one's super long and has a lot of days and times because it just spans almost the entire career of a ball player, whereas this spans about 9 years, and it tells a story of many people as opposed to telling one person's story and what they thought of many people. This is more an all-encompassing history. There is a lot of individual games talked about in this book, and so they'll be like, oh, this person hit first, and this person was a bat, and this person, you know, was a pitcher, and da-da-da, and like names. This is obviously a book designed for someone who has more knowledge of the history of Mets than I do, but I'm along for the ride and I'm feeling taken up by it and swept up by it, and it is really interesting. And I think the thing that keeps you captivated, whether you know the players or not, is that the Mets story is an underdog story. It is a story about a losing team 95% of the time. There's also a lot of stuff in this book that rings true to Mets today. So on Thursday, opening day, March 28th, the Mets got rained out and they had to play their first game on Friday, so I watched some of that. And the Mets are never good. They lost their first game this year as well, and they're never good to start. They need a couple of weeks or months to really warm up to playing the real season, and that's even mentioned in the game where the manager says that they need extra weeks of spring training. Their spring training doesn't end. They keep spring training into the season, which I think is funny because, again, that still happens today. So far I'm really liking this. I'm excited to get to the part with the pictures, which is not that far. It's like another quarter of the book. My copy is really beat up. We got this, I don't know, somewhere at a used library sale or something, and like all the pages are falling out. So I'm having to be really gentle and careful with it. I made the mistake of taking it into bed and dropping it off the bed, and all the pages fell out and I had to reorganize them, and like the back cover's all messed up and there's a big chunk out of it. So it's definitely the book now, a book that I have to be a little bit more careful with and read only at certain times. But I will continue to read this, and when I read some more, I will come back to you. It's now April 14th, and I'm still making my way through The Incredible World Champ Mets by Maury Allen. I've passed the picture part, which is fun, but I was very disappointed that the pictures were not counted as pages, so they didn't count towards my page count. But I'm about 2/3, almost 3/4 of the way through this book, and so far it is really fascinating. Like I said, it's told in a very like tongue-in-cheek baseball language from like the 50s, 60s, and 70s kind of manner, so it does slow me down a little bit, and it does make me not want to necessarily read like a bunch of it all in a row. I've been working my way through it very slowly, and every time I open the book, more pages kind of fall out, so I'm having to only like read it at certain times when I can be careful with it. I can't like carry it around, so it's definitely causing my reading to go kind of slowly. I'm going to read you a passage from this book in just a second that I thought was fascinating, but I wanted to also say that I started another book for this vlog, and it is Murder at the Baseball Hall of Fame. So last year I read a baseball cozy mystery for my opening day vlog, and I didn't think I was going to do that today because I didn't have one, but then I went to a book sale a couple of weeks ago and I found this book. Murder at the Baseball Hall of Fame is by David Daniel and Chris Carpenter. Not that Chris Carpenter, whichever one you're thinking of. David Daniel is a mystery author and Chris Carpenter was a CNN broadcaster in Boston, so they wrote this book together. I'm only about 35 pages in. I'm on chapter 7, and it's fun so far. We follow Frank Branco, who is Frank Branco, is that his name? Yeah. Frank Branco. We follow Frank Branco, who is a ex-police detective from Boston who happened to win tickets to go to the Hall of Fame induction. This is written, I think, in 1995, and it's set in the 90s as well. So Frank loves baseball, and he goes to this induction day celebration, and at one of the night parties that they're having, a car crashes through the woods into the party, and Frank tries to rescue the driver, but before he can rescue the driver, the car explodes and the driver is killed. But Frank knows that the driver was probably dead already. He couldn't free him from the car. He smelled a weird smell. It just doesn't fit with him. It doesn't seem right. It doesn't sit well with him. And being a ex-cop, he decides to investigate. Throughout the first very little part of this book, we see Frank starting his investigation and learning who the dead man in the car is, and also going to the local police and trying to get them to understand that this is a murder, not a suicide or accidental death. Frank butts heads with local police, and as he does so, we find out a little bit more about Frank. He was shot in the line of duty, and he has a gamey leg, and we also kind of learn that there is one specific person in his past, seemingly a bad guy, seemingly the reason that he was shot, that keeps coming up and that people bring up around him. So we're trying to figure out the mystery of the man in the car, and we're also trying to learn Frank's past and more about Frank as a person. So far it's pretty interesting. I mean, I think baseball cozy mysteries are not like the most riveting if you're not a baseball fan, because there are a lot of like baseball names thrown around and stats involved. If you're not into it, you might not be into it. I'm into it enough that I want to read it, but I'm not so into it that they're like amazing to me. I've never been to the Baseball Hall of Fame, but my husband's been there many times, both for fun and through his job. So it is someplace that I am familiar with by association, like hearing about it. I've never been to Cooperstown, New York, so I can't visualize it from experience, but I can visualize it from like looking up the places that my husband's gone or his description of places. So it is fun for that reason. And it does definitely make me want to go to Cooperstown and make me want to go to the Hall of Fame even more. We haven't actually visited the Hall of Fame in this book yet, as far as like going to the museum. So I think it would be interesting if we do get there eventually. So these are now the 2 books that I'm reading for this vlog, and when I read some more, I will let you know. But before I go, I wanted to read a little quote from this Mets Nonfiction. This Mets Nonfiction starts with the inception of the team because they were an add-on team when there was expansion throughout the baseball leagues. So the Mets came on, and one of the things that the Mets did was fill a hole that the Dodgers and the Giants had left when both those teams left New York for California. Fans of those teams converted to the Mets in a lot of ways. They were people who were not willing to be Yankees fans. They needed a team of their own. So even though the Mets were absolutely awful in their first few years, and let's face it, are still a lot of the time, the Mets fans really went wild for the Mets. They really found something that they could identify with. And this section has a little bit to do with that and talks about it. I have to take my glasses off. So it says, the psychologists began analyzing the character in Mets fans. They studied them in terms of their loyalty to the underdog Mets, their opposition to the establishment team, and their identification with losers. Words like mass identification and defeatist complex crept into daily newspapers as people wrote in asking for more and more information on this new breed. The Mets were so far out, so bad, so terrible, they were really in. People could show their independence, their tolerance, their understanding for the oppressed by being a Mets fan. And I think that that's still true today, and I think that's part of the reason that I'm a Mets fan. I grew up around Yankees fans. A very good friend of our family's was a Yankees fan, and really where I live in New Jersey, people are generally Yankees fans, not Mets fans. But when I started to learn more about the Mets and when I started to watch the Mets, I realized that the Mets are the underdog team. They are the working class team. They are the team for every man, whereas the Yankees are rich, exclusive, a little bit snooty, a little bit spoiled, a little bit stuck up. The Mets fans are just the general, genuine public, the working people, the people who understand that you lose a lot and you can't throw money at losing a lot to win. It doesn't make the win satisfying. So I thought that that was a really interesting portion of this book, and I was super glad to have that put into words, and I thought that you might enjoy it as well. All right, so when I read some more, I will let you know. Let me know what your favorite baseball team is in the comments below. Not gotten any further in the Mets book, but I'm back because a very unexpected turn of events happened where our detective in Murder at the Baseball Hall of Fame ended up going to Asbury Park. Well, okay, technically he went to Ocean Grove, which is one town south of us. All the windows are open, so it's super loud. The Baseball Hall of Fame is in Cooperstown, New York, which is in upstate New York. New York is a huge state. Our main detective is from Boston, which is close to upstate New York, but he had to end up going down to New Jersey to follow a lead, and it took him to Ocean Grove. Ocean Grove is known as God's Square Mile. He went to meet a reformed huckster, or a reformed, grifter. He ended up having a little time in Ocean Grove. So we'll see if he ends up coming back or if he ends up going to Asbury Park or anything like that. Now his investigation is taking him down to Florida. So I just wanted to pop in and mention that because I thought it was pretty neat. It is much later, and I have finished both books for the baseball book. vlog for my opening day vlog. It's been quite a while actually since I finished these. I finished Murder at the Baseball Hall of Fame at the kind of the end of April, and then I finished The Incredible World Champ Mets by Maury in May. It is still May, so it's about 2 months after opening day. So it's been about 2 months since I started this vlog. I really enjoyed doing this vlog, and I definitely want to always do an opening day vlog or a baseball opening day vlog or a baseball vlog, whatever you want to call it, because I think it's a fun way to get me to read some of my baseball book collection. It's a fun way to be looking out for and continue to read some baseball cozy mysteries, which I really enjoy reading. This was a great one. This was perfect. I really liked Murder at the Baseball Hall of Fame. I preferred this book over the cozy mystery book that I read last year because this one was a little bit more, I don't know, it was a little bit more fun. It was definitely dated just like that one. That was Murder in Wrigley Field, Murder on Wrigley Field, something like that. And that one was written in the 80s and it was very dated. This one was dated in another way. It definitely had a real 90s feel to it. I loved that it took place partly in Ocean Grove near us, a small part of it, but it was referenced several times, which is really cool. And then there was like this kind of weird added sexual element, which Murder on or Murder at or Murder in Wrigley Field also had a little bit of a weird sexual element, but this one, like, it was more incorporated into the plot, not just like casual sexism. Part of the wrap up of the mystery had to do with this weird sexual element. So if that's something that you're not interested in, definitely look out for that. I would also say watch out for that there is like a really gruesome animal death for no reason at the end of this book. There's kind of a villainous character and you already know that they're bad. You already know that they're not cool people. You already know that they have done very, very bad things. And then there's like a gruesome cat murder. Why? You know, you don't really need that to depict this person as being a bad person. You already know that they're a bad person. So like, why did you have to add that in? So that I really didn't like. But other than that, I did enjoy this one. And if it were series, which is not, I think it would have been a fun series to read because I think they could have done a lot with different sports motifs or different baseball motifs, and there was a lot of interesting characters who could have come up again in other books, which I enjoyed. I also really enjoyed The Incredible World Champ Mets. There's definitely a lot of technical, it's not told in a technical way, but like if you are not a baseball stats person, this feels like overly whelmingly stats. And not necessarily stats, because stats were different when this was written than what stats are now, which are like really intense. It's not like sabermetrics. It's way, way, way before sabermetrics, but it is like every at-bat, every play, like every pitch. And it does get very, very tedious. I think my favorite part was kind of the beginning and the inception of the Mets, how the Mets got started, why they got started as an expansion team, and then learning about some of the like critical players, actual players, but also coaches and managers and people like that who were vital to the beginning of the Mets and how the Mets were perceived as a team, which is like a huge thing about this book. I read you that quote earlier and I really love that quote, and it really sums up like why I'm a Mets fan in a lot of ways. It was interesting to read all of that and to hear all of that and to hear the Mets history and to learn about maybe baseball players that I might have known their names, but I didn't know how they were connected with the Mets or how they made the Mets what they are today and what they were during their first World Series. That part was really cool, but I think at the end, probably the last like quarter was just like very tedious, very slow, and it's part of the reason that it took me so long to read this book, because it was just like every game, every play, everything that's going on. I think I mentioned it before, but like a lot of the quotes in this and a lot of the kind of like playful baseball lingo talk felt a little bit forced. Like, I don't think that the quotes were all 100% accurate. I don't think that it was exactly what people were saying. Maybe it was how people talked at the time, or maybe it was the trend in talking about baseball at the time, but it wasn't realistic. So there was a lot of that at the end too, that you kind of were like unsure how genuine some of those things were, and therefore it kind of didn't propel me through the book, didn't make me want to really finish the book. Like, I knew they were going to win the World Series. That's not a surprise. It's history, and it is the whole point of this book. So I was really hoping at the very end there would be more kind of about the aftermath and what went on maybe the next year. But because this book was written so close to that event, there's not really anything. Like, the World Series happens, the Mets win, yay, Mets win, and it's over. The book is over. So I think the first half of this book, totally fascinating, and I would like to read more books along those lines, more books about the history of the Mets, more books touching on the various people in the Mets and how they shaped the Mets, but I don't necessarily want to read like about one game or leading up to one game. But I really did enjoy this. It was super interesting. Unfortunately, this copy is like pretty much done for. It's in multiple pieces. I'll definitely keep it and keep it on my vintage shelf, keep it on my red shelf, but I won't be reading this copy again if I decide I ever want to reread it, which I would actually consider doing. I did like it that much. In this vlog, we read 2 baseball books at the beginning of baseball season. We've been watching a lot of baseball. We've been seeing a lot of baseball things. We've happened on some baseball games. My husband went to the Yankees game, so it was all fun. Very exciting baseball time. Happy that baseball season's back. Happy to have done another baseball opening day vlog. So let me know in the comments below if you've ever read a baseball book or any kind of sports cozy mystery books. I think they're probably very niche, but I definitely enjoy them. So if you have a baseball cozy mystery book that you could recommend to me, I would love to know that. Thanks so much for joining me today, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!